So, what are we drinking out here?
So I am drinking the Aaron Malt single malt Scotch, which is one of my favorites. It's a lighter malt. It's not super peaty. Um, Coming after the dinner we've just had, kind of helps it go down, helps ease into the evening, creates the relaxing atmosphere.
Relaxing atmosphere. I think that's what I categorize Omaha, Nebraska as. It's been quite a fun, chill evening here with you.
It's a chill city. It's great because it has all the things you want a city to have. It's got skyscrapers. It's got things to do. It's got nightlife. It's got good food. It's got sports. It's got culture. It's got shows. It's got universities. It's got shops. It's got an art scene. Uh, but it's all easily accessible. You can get anywhere in 20 minutes.
I didn't realize the strategic importance of Omaha, but you enlightened me on a couple things, including not just the military, but also communication and finance as well.
Well, yeah, because we're smack in the middle of the country. And that's why they put Strategic Air Command here back when it was that in the 50s, because it was in the middle of the country and they figured the Soviets couldn't get a bomber here to bomb it before they could get intercepted by somebody else first. But also because it's in the middle of the country, a lot of the railroads happened to come through here. And because the railroads came through here when they ran telephone lines, they came through here. And then that turned into fiber optic cables. And so Omaha is a hub for trade and commerce and communications. And because of that, we lend ourselves naturally to, like, Union Pacific is headquartered here. Berkshire Hathaway obviously is headquartered here, Warren Buffett's company. The TD Ameritrade just took over Schwab out here. There's a number of other Fortune 500 companies. Of course, Mutual of Omaha is a big one. They're building that big skyscraper downtown that you saw. It's going to be our third properly sized skyscraper downtown. And then we've got all the data centers that are out here. They're keyed into the power grid out here. They're keyed into the fiber optic network so they can handle people's data from all over the country and all over the world. And it's all happening in Nebraska.
Yeah. Who would have thought? And thanks for the tour of the city in your convertible. We were driving in, which one of your cars?
It's a BMW 440i. I just recently got it. And I like BMWs a lot. It's the second one I've had because they are more on the sporty side of the German triad. You've got Mercedes and Audi and BMW, and they each kind of tend to do something a little differently. Mercedes is known for being luxury, very nice cars, very smooth, and so on. And they make some sporty cars as well. Don't get me wrong, but you think Mercedes, you think luxury. You think Audi, you think tech. They were the first ones to have the digital dash and the ultrasonic sensors and all this other stuff. They were the first ones to do like all-wheel drive, proper all-wheel drive. Made them very successful in rally circuits. But BMW is about sport. That's kind of like the core part of their brand identity. And I like to drive cars, and I like sporty cars, and I also liked all of the support for them because there's so much aftermarket support. There's such a good enthusiast community for them. Anything you want to find for BMW, you can find. Anything you want to do to it, you can do to it. So there's a lot of freedom that's in there.
Yeah, definitely. But that's not your dream car,
No,
which is
which is an Aston Martin. I wanted a DB9 for 20 years, ever since they came out in 2004 when I was in high school. And then I managed to pick one up in 2023. Uh, Quite on accident. I found one that I could actually afford and was able to get it, and have been loving it ever since.
and why is the Aston your dream car?
I think it's because of the emotional response. I mean, yes, there's a James Bond connection, and that's cool, but they're just designed so beautifully. They look so beautiful, they feel so beautiful, they drive very well, they've got this great, big, glorious, naturally aspirated V12. It's incredibly smooth engine, it sounds amazing and like nothing else, and just that aesthetic of it just makes me very happy.
Yeah. I think you just mentioned James Bond. You're a fan, as am I. Who is your favorite Bond, by the way?
Brosnan,
Okay.
100%. The first James Bond movie I ever saw was Tomorrow Never Dies. It was at the premiere in 1997. I was in Texas growing up, and I got to dress up in a suit and go to dinner with my parents in Austin and then go watch this movie. And the biggest thing I remember from it was he had a silver BMW 750 with the remote control in the phone. And he drove it around the parking garage from his phone, fighting off the bad guys. And I was like, wow, this is the greatest thing ever. And that started my love of James Bond and kind of kickstarted my love of cars, which had already kind of started a little bit from growing up watching Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and Herbie. And now it was like, oh, this car goes around and shoots rockets and you can drive it from your phone. This is great. And that just kicked off the whole thing.
Sure. And so you like James Bond, but you also like Star Trek,
Mm.
right? How did the love of Star Trek lead into your interest in the military?
So I grew up watching Star Trek a lot when I was a kid, and it was kind of, I think, my parents' way of teaching me ethics because I was allowed to watch Star Trek for 6 hours straight on Sunday afternoons. It's the only time I was ever allowed to sit in front of the TV that long. And then afterwards at dinner, my dad would quiz me about what had happened during the episode. Why did Captain Picard do this, and why did Data do that? Next Generation, and and that kind of developed a habit of thinking about things and considering things and questioning assumptions in me, and an appreciation for the concept of, hey, you can go out on a ship with a bunch of other people and have adventures and go do things and go make things a little bit better. And so when I was in high school and I was looking around at what to do, and I got interested in math and science and things, and oh, nuclear power is cool. Oh, they do nuclear power in aircraft carriers. I was like, oh, I hadn't really been interested in the military before, but maybe being on a ship. They were on ships in Star Trek. I could get on that. And then I found out, oh, they have nuclear power on submarines. Oh, submarines are cool. It's kind of like a starship, but underwater. I could go do that. So that started an appeal in me, and I reached out and got some books and did some research and looked into the history of it. And then the more I read and the more I learned, the more I found an affinity for it. And that's said when I was 16 years old, that's what I want to go do.
I'm very glad that you watched Star Trek because the rest of us can sleep safely because of your wonderful work. So you're in Omaha, Nebraska right now, and real quick before we jump back into your service, what's the deal with Omaha? Why did it become an important city? Was it because of the indigenous people here? Like what was the history of this area?
So my history is a little rusty, but I'll give you the best I understand of it. When the pioneers were coming out westward, it started with Lewis and Clark. There's actually a monument to them over in Council Bluffs. They came through here. They crossed the Missouri River. They met the Omaha Indians who were living here at the time, and they all kind of gathered in Omaha. And it turned out because there's a phenomenon that today is known as the Oma Dome, where all the really bad weather, the storms and things that'll roll across the plains up from Kansas, tend to go around Omaha proper. So that's where the natives settled because that was the place they were going to get rained on all the time. It made a lot of sense. And then as more pioneers came on their way out west and settled, they figured, oh, this is a good place to settle. And so they built up the city, and because there was a populace, it was a good place for the outlying farms to bring their cattle to get slaughtered and traded and sold and so on. And then the railroads came through, and that made it really easy to tranship goods and people, and then the communications and so on. It just sort of built up over time.
Even the weather is strategically, placed here in Omaha. That's fascinating. So you're serving in the Navy. You did ROTC.
I did.
How was that? And what are kind of your memories from doing that at the University of Illinois?
Well, the biggest memory is meeting Darnell, who's our mutual friend. Has he been on your podcast yet?
Yes.
I,
Yeah.
I don't hope so.
We've spent a couple hours chopping it up, and he's a big hit. He's one of the most listened to episodes, and that boy could talk.
Yeah, I believe it. He says a lot of really great things. He has an amazing mind, and he has a great passion and ability to bring people together. I've never seen somebody who can bring so many unique and talented people into his orbit, and I'm very glad to know him. But I met him through ROTC. He was actually my freshman year, his sophomore year. He was my boss, and I was assigned to help him, and he was kind of one of my first mentors in the service. And even though he's no longer in it, I'm very grateful for that initial mentorship. So ROTC was something that I hadn't kind of planned to do, but I found it was the best way for me to get into the service where I was at a civilian university. I was getting a civilian degree. I was able to hang out with all the people that went there, put on the uniform 1 day a week, work out in the mornings twice a week, and then in the summertime, get sent out with the fleet to learn how to be a sailor. And it had its challenges, adding, the extra military work and the fitness on top of being an engineering major, which was no easy feat. There was a lot of coursework there, but it was very good for me in my development because I got exposed to a lot of things I might not otherwise have been. And then being able to go out with the fleet in the summer times, that was amazing because I got to go places and do things that I wouldn't have ever been able to do. I got to go on the USS Louisiana in 2010, first ever submarine, and learn how submarines worked and qualify to stand watch on a submarine and really get that experience. And then in 2011, for my senior year, I went out on the USS Enterprise. and got to see all different aspects of how to run an aircraft carrier, from running the nuclear reactors to launching planes off the flight deck to figuring out how to navigate wherever you were in the world. And got to go to Bahrain, got to go to Crete, got to meet a whole bunch of different people and see a whole bunch of different stuff. And for a 21-year-old, that's a huge, world expanding experience, and gave me a lot of perspective, and something I've never had the opportunity to do since, but I'm very glad I did.
Yeah. So with Reserve Officer Training Corps, what was your coursework like? I mean, I know you're a big fan of history and statescraft and philosophy, but what are you trained on?
So my undergraduate degree was in nuclear engineering from U of I, and that's typical engineering school. You start off with a lot of math and science and your gen eds, and then junior senior year you're pretty much in like the NPRE courses where you're learning about neutron diffusion and transport, reactor design, modeling. Did computer modeling with MATLAB and a couple other things. Some of the older languages, like all of the risk analysis and like disaster models, were done in Fortran. So we had to learn how to code Fortran at least a little bit. And I don't think anybody else really knows how to code Fortran who isn't doing something that is still being done in Fortran as a legacy solution. So that was entertaining. And then for ROTC specifically, they had one course a semester that you took. It was a naval science course. So when you were a freshman, Naval Science 101 was, this is intro to Navy. This is how to salute people. This is when to salute people. This is how to board a ship. This is how to lead a ship. This is what the ranks are, not just of the Navy, but of all the services, because you have to know what they are and know how to address them and know how to respect them, and give them the customs and courtesies that are expected. And then we get into history, we get into tactics, we get into leadership as you get into your senior year. So one course a semester, not very hard coursework wise, but definitely important professionally. And then of course you have the drill. So it was Thursday when I was in during my time at Illinois. Thursday afternoon we would do drill at 3 o'clock in the afternoon for a couple of hours, and uh, we would all get together as a battalion. We'd all be in uniform. We'd get in formation, and maybe we'd practice marching. Maybe we would break off and do some sort of team building activity. Maybe we'd go in and have some briefs and some training. Sometimes we'd go out and just do volunteer work. Like we'd go, we had a section of the highway. We did the Adopt a Highway program out in Champaign. We'd go pick up trash from the side of the road. Didn't wear dress uniform for that. We'd come in proper civilian attire, they call it, jeans and polo shirts. And it was a good way of keeping you on track when you're a, 18, 19, 20-year-old trying to figure out what you're doing and keep you grounded throughout your college career. Because, of course, you also got checked on your academics. Your report card went to the ROTC staff. And if you weren't doing so well, they'd be like, hey, what do you need? Like, we can put you on study hours. We can get you a tutor. We can help you out. But you're expected to maintain a set standard. And if there were members of the unit who hadn't had those kind of expectations put on them before, it was a good guide rail for, hey, you can't just not do what you need to do. We do expect things of you. We are going to help keep you on track.
Yeah. That word that you just mentioned, standard, that's one of the first things that comes to mind when I think about the military. And the military receives high marks for teaching teamwork and leadership and strategy and tactics, obviously. Do you think there's anything that you do in terms of the exercises or, things that they put you through that really push any of those things, like while you were in ROTC?
I think there's a number of things. Leadership is the biggest thing. Um, Tactics vary by platform and warfare specialty, but leadership is universal.
So, like leadership, I'm just curious, and I'm sure, like, post college, there's a tremendous amount of growth in leadership. But when you're working with people that young, and there's so much stuff going on in college as well, right? And we're just developing both physically and mentally. How do you lead effectively a group of mostly men? I'm assuming.
Mostly, but
Yeah.
not always.
Not always. Yeah, that just there's a lot of stuff going on in their lives at that point. Like, what are effective leadership strategies for that specific group?
Well, there's a few of them. It depends on the situation. It's the famous Naval War College answer. It depends for everything on the circumstance.
Good answer.
Uh, there's different kinds of leadership. I don't know if you've read, there's things like legitimate leadership, which comes from you have a given rank or a given position or a given title. Therefore, you have some legitimate authority and you can demand people's obedience from that. That's always a starting point. Uh, if you show up on board a ship as a new officer, by virtue of your rank, you have some authority. If you show up as a sea returnee, someone who's already done a sea tour, gone to shore tour, come back, and now you're a more senior officer, you have even more authority and even some instant credibility if you're qualified in that warfare specialty. People assume that you know what you're doing, even though when you show up as a brand new officer to your first boat, they're not going to make that assumption because you don't and everybody knows it, but you still have that legitimate authority. So that's your starting point, at least in the service. Then you have to build uh, leadership ability through credibility and through moral authority. And that comes through getting to know the people that you're leading and allowing them to get to know you, to see how you operate, to see your standards, whether or not you hold yourself to a standard, whether or not you hold them to a standard, whether or not you can be lenient if the situation calls for it, whether or not you are going to be harsh, whether you are going to uh, work with them as people and get to understand them and their unique abilities and their unique limitations, or not. And I have found the most success I have had as a leader has come through building a human connection and making it so that I can go up to somebody and instead of saying, Petty Officer Smith, you need to do this, go do this. If I can come up to him and say, hey, MT2, we need to get this done. I think you're a best man for the job. Can you do this? And even though I'm asking them, like, they know they need to do it if I want them to do it, but I don't need to rely on that. I can approach them as a human being and I can say, "Hey, we need this thing done. We think you're the right guy to do it. Can you go do this?" And the answer is yes.
Can you explain the ranks in the Navy?
Absolutely. So there are 2 major divisions. There is the enlisted ranks, and then there are the officer ranks. There's also warrant officers that are kinda in between them, and they're mostly down to what your job is. In the Navy, the enlisted sailors are the backbone of the force. The vast majority of the sailors are enlisted, and they are all skilled tradesmen. They're broken down into rates, which are basically job descriptions. So I talked about MT2 earlier. That would be a missile technician. You could be a torpedo-man working on torpedoes. You could be a sonarman working in the sonar shack. You could be a CS, a culinary specialist, somebody who cooks, make sure the crew is fed. You could be a machinist mate working on mechanical stuff, either in the nuclear propulsion spaces or in auxiliary propulsion spaces. You could be an electronics technician working on reactor controls. You could be a navigational electronics technician working on the ship's navigational systems. You could be a radioman. You could be a yeoman doing admin and administration work for the command. All sorts of different jobs you can have. And you can have an entire career in the enlisted ranks as a skilled craftsman, bringing your specific expertise to the team. And then the officer ranks, you have people who, again, start off in their entire career, maybe, uh, from being a junior officer and ensign all the way up through a captain. And their job is leadership and management. So you start off your first tour, you show up as ensign or a junior grade lieutenant, depending on how long you've been in the service, through your training pipeline, and you're going to be put in charge of a division. We're going to take a group of 3 to 15 sailors, qualified sailors, and say, all right, you are the officer responsible for them. They have all been here longer than you. They all know their job, and you don't, but you are nominally in charge. Figure it out. So that's quite a burden to start off with. And you've had some training to start you with, but this is really where the rubber meets the road. And you have to actually learn how to lead sailors and how to do your job as an officer. And your sailors that you are in charge of will teach you if you work with them and you treat them as human beings, and they will help you grow and develop and be successful, especially the senior enlisted. The 3 most senior ratings in the enlisted service in the Navy are called chief petty officers. So chief petty officer, senior chief petty officer, and master chief petty officer. And they are a special breed of sailor that has been in the Navy for a significant period of time, has mastered their craft as those skilled tradesmen. They are experts at being a machinist or a torpedoman or a missile technician or a sonarman. And they are also deck play leaders, where they are responsible for the day-to-day management of their divisions. And they're also traditionally responsible for training junior officers. And that's very, very important because the officers live or die by the success of the sailors that they lead. The men and women that they lead determine their career outcomes long term. It's a very unique way of doing business. Whereas if you're an enlisted sailor, your performance determines your success, excuse me, up to get to the chief pay officer level. Officers from day one are judged on how well they can lead a team. They're also judged on how well they do personally, but they cannot separate their success from the success of their team. And they have a sense of accountability for the success of their team. And that comes from their team. It comes from them being able to lead them. And that's very important. And then as you get more senior, let's say you come back for your second tour and you're a department head. Now you're in charge of multiple divisions for a whole department. On a submarine, underneath the captain and the executive officer, who's second in command, you have four principal departments. You have the weapons department that deals with sonar, fire control, torpedoes, missiles if the ship has them. May also deal with deck and salvage and possibly scuba diving if the ship has a scuba diver division. You also have the navigation department, and that deals with navigation, communications, and IT services, as well as electronic warfare. Then you have the engineering department. That's all of the nuclear reactor spaces, making sure that the engine room operates properly, that the reactor is safely operated, the ship has propulsion electrical power. It also has the auxiliary division, which maintains the ship's diesel backup generator, maintains the plumbing, maintains the environmental systems, make sure that all of those are working 24/7. Then you have the supply department, which is run by the only non-combat officer on the ship, who's effectively known as Chop because his insignia kind of looks like a pork chop. It's actually an oak leaf sprig, but we all call him the Chop. And he's a first tour officer, unlike the other three department heads who are second tours. And his job is to be in charge of the supply division and the culinary specialist division. And he has a very unique job because the captain and the XO have been a engineer or a weapons officer or a navigator. They've not been a Chop. The Chop is the only guy on board who's ever done his job. And so that's a kind of unique position for him to be in. It's also a lot of responsibility that's put on a first time officer. So there's a lot of extra special kind of relationship between the Chop and the XO and CO to make sure that his responsibilities or her responsibilities are met properly.
Where do you fit in all of this?
So I have done 2 tours on submarines. My first was on the Key West from 2017, or excuse me, 2014 to 2017. So I came on board. I started out as the fire control officer in charge of fire control division, weapons department. That's where I kind of learned how to be a division officer. And then I went to engineering. Every combat officer on a submarine has to do at least a year in an engineering division officer's role. We were all expected to be nuclear power certified. We were all expected to qualify to be the engineer of a submarine. So I did my 15 months, as it turned out, as reactor controls assistant. So I was the division officer for reactor controls division. I was responsible for the operation of the ship's nuclear reactor, the maintenance of its um, instrumentation systems, and the management of the people who were responsible for maintaining and operating those things. When I was done with that, I ended up being the ship's land officer for a little bit, and then I picked up additionally being in charge of the ship's communications division. And by the end of my time there, I was also in charge of the navigation division. So I was kind of doing 3 division officer jobs at once, but that was a factor of our manning at the time, how many division officers, junior officers we had on board, and how qualified they were. And then I left Key West, came here to Omaha for the first time to be at Strategic Command as a lieutenant. Discovered the strategic mission, said, "Hey, this is really cool. This is interesting. I want to go do more of this." So I asked to go back and be a strategic weapons officer on a ballistic missile submarine, and I got my wish. I got to go to Connecticut for the advanced tactical course, and then reported to the USS Alabama out of Bangor, Washington. I started my training to be a weapons officer in Bangor in December of 2020. I ended up relieving as weapons officer in June of 2021 on board the ship and served there for 37 months. So as the weapons officer, I started out day one, fifth most senior person on board, the most junior of the 3 department heads. And then over my 3.5 years, ended up becoming the third in command of the ship by virtue of seniority. And that entire time, I was responsible for about 60 officers and enlisted sailors. Not only on my ship, but I also did an extra patrol on board the USS Maine when their WEPS wasn't able to go to sea for a patrol, and was in charge of their about 60 officers and enlisted men and women. And that was a co-ed boat that they had integrated women on as we were more and more shifting to a mixed gender crew model to allow women on submarines to be able to serve eventually anywhere on board the fleet.
And while at sea, you were involved in a fairly historic moment, right?
Well, the one thing we did that was pretty special was we did the first at-sea exchange of command. So ballistic missile submarine, unlike a fast attack submarine, which can do a plethora of different things, ballistic missile submarine's job is to carry 20 Trident missiles, which could be launched underwater, go up into outer space, and then deliver their payload pretty much anywhere in the world. Our job is to take those missiles out to sea and to be ready, if directed by the president, to launch those missiles. That means we don't get to go to a lot of ports, but it does mean that we are there constantly. Some boat is out in the ocean 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year without fail. That includes Christmases, weekends, birthdays, everything. In order to do that and maximize the time at sea, because boats, if you keep them maintained properly, can be at sea most of the time. Crews cannot. People need time with their families. They need time at home. They need time to decompress. So, in order to maximize the boat's time at sea doing the mission, each SSBN or boomer has two crews, a blue crew and a gold crew. So, I was the weapons officer of the gold crew. And what will happen is a crew will take the boat from their counterpart crew. They will do a refit for some period of time, nominally about 6 weeks. They'll go to sea. They'll do a patrol, nominally about 3 months. They'll come back into port. We'll do an exchange of command. The other crew will take over. They'll do their refit, and then they will go to sea. And while they're at sea, the other crew is doing training, taking some leave, getting qualifications done, generally getting ready for the next patrol. What we did in 2022 for the first time ever was an at-sea exchange of command on the USS Alabama. So what we did was we drove into the Strait of Juan de Fuca, surfaced, we got half of the blue crew on board, half of the gold crew off, turned around, submerged, went out, did a bunch of the exchange of command admin paperwork, turning over programs, material status, and so on, came back in, surfaced a couple days later, did the whole thing again. You got the other half of the blue crew on board, said the final words, I relieve you, I stand relieved, got the rest of the gold crew off, blue crew turned the boat around, dove, went back out, kept in the mission. And by doing that, we were able to show to ourselves, to our allies and partners, who we assure through providing our strategic coverage, and to our adversaries, that we can maintain our ships at sea continuously, that we can flex our operations as necessary to meet a very dynamic global environment, and that we can respond to anything that our adversaries may do by ensuring that our strategic protection is available and is ready and is reliable and is uninterruptible.
What's the longest you've been at sea?
Consecutively, about 3 months. I forget the exact number of days.
And so when you're in a submarine, is the submarine always underwater or during that time or?
Not necessarily. So, for starters, you can't dive next to the pier. The piers are generally in fairly shallow areas. So, you get on board, you get underway. So, you get off the pier, tugs usually pull off the pier, and you drive out to a point where you can submerge the ship, dive the ship. So, that may take anywhere from half an hour to 45 minutes, like it did in Guam. It was a pretty short trip. It's an island in the middle of the Pacific. The water around is very deep. To it may take a few hours. It may take many hours, depending on which port you're coming out of. But eventually you'll get out to the point where, okay, the water's deep enough. We figured out we can dive here, get everybody below deck, and submerge the ship. And then same thing on the way back. You'll surface around about the same point and then drive in on the surface in order to moor the ship at its home port. Additionally, you might need to get a resupply. So submarines carry months of food when they get underway, but occasionally we like to get some more. Fresh fruit and vegetables doesn't last very long when you're underwater on a submarine, so we might like to get a resupply. We can do what's called a BSP, a brief stop for personnel. Come near a port, have a tug or some other support ship come out, meet you, surface, tug comes alongside. You can transfer personnel, you can transfer stores, and you can transfer mail. You can also transfer spare parts. So we can get fresh food, we can get parts, we can get people on the ship, we can get people off the ship. This is commonly how inspection teams come on board the boat or get off the boat, which is much preferred. And then the tug or support vessel can go back to port. We can turn around, submerge, keep doing what we were doing.
Roughly how many people will be on the submarine?
About 160.
Wow.
Yeah. So you go to sea and you spend 3 months with 159 of your closest friends. And you eat together, you work together, you play video games or watch TV or shoot the breeze together. You may work out together. You don't sleep together. Each person has their own rack. It's about 6'6" long, about 2.5 foot wide, and about 2 foot tall. And they get stacked free high. So you got somebody on the bottom rack, somebody on the middle rack, somebody on the top rack, except for the XO and the captain. They get their own private staterooms. Everybody else is in a like 2 or 3-man stateroom for the officers, and then enlisted berthing is, bigger. On a boomer, enlisted berthing is a series of 9-man bunk rooms that are shoved in between the missile tubes. So you're literally sleeping with a space-going missile either side of you in your bunker. That's not the entire time.
So, what is life like day to day on the submarine? And once you're off, then what is life like after that?
So on the ship, most people stand a watch. A watch is a period of nominally about 8 hours a day now, where you are operating some port of the ship. So I'll give you an example. When I was on board, I would wake up, shower, shave real quick, and then I would go and do what is called a pre-watch tour. So I was standing officer of the deck, which is the officer in overall charge of the ship for that watch. So I would walk the ship from the front of the forward compartment, all through the forward compartment, through the missile compartment, as far as the engineering spaces. There's another officer called the engineering officer of the watch who's in charge of the engineering spaces. Them, I would expect to tour the engine room in lieu of my doing it. But I had to know what was going on in the ship, what equipment was running, what evolutions were in progress, where we were, where we were supposed to go, what broadcast we were clear of. That's coming up and getting messages, what broadcast we'd have to clear the next time, and generally making sure that I understand everything that was happening and was needed to happen on my watch so that when I relieved the officer of the deck and took over, I was able to seamlessly continue the ship's operation. So I would do that, get all that turnover. Then I'd go down and have a meal, breakfast, lunch, dinner, whatever it was, depending which watch I happened to be standing that day. We'd also have a pre-watch briefing right before the reel where we'd share this information with everybody on the team. Go down, eat your meal. Enlisted crew eats in crew's mess, which is a buffet style. You go through the line and eat at tables. Officers eat in the wardroom, a little more formal. It's a conference room slash uh, dining facility slash emergency surgery theater if absolutely necessary. But go in there, have captain and the officers all eat together, family style. Pantry watch captain comes out, hands dishes around, everybody gets what they want. You eat your meal, and then you go up, relieve the watch. The relieved guy comes down, eats his meal at second sitting, and goes about his day. So that for those 8 hours, I was in charge of the ship. I was controlling where we went, giving orders to the ship's control party. I was keeping track of where we were, working with the quartermaster, keeping track of communications with the radioman, working with the engineer to make sure we had propulsion, and then dealing with any other maintenance or evolutions as necessary, and also keeping the captain apprised of where we were, what we were doing, and getting permission for different evolutions if required. After 8 hours of that, get relieved, go down, eat the meal, whatever it is, and then you have another 6 to 8 hours of time that is flexible. Maybe you needed to do some training. Maybe you needed to do some administration. Maybe you needed to go monitor an evolution because we have programs where we track uh, what the crew is doing in terms of maintenance and we monitor these evolutions in order to ensure quality. And also to provide any comments, any points of improvement. And generally, like they would have me go and monitor an engineering maintenance item, which I normally wouldn't see. I might have questions, get a different perspective on it. The engineer might go monitor one of my guys doing maintenance, something he didn't normally see. He got to learn by seeing that maintenance performed, and we might get an outside perspective. So that's one of the processes that we have to make sure that we're maintaining a very high standard of mission readiness. And then after the admin and the training and what other work needed to get do is done, then you have a little free time. Maybe you watch a movie, maybe you play a video game, maybe you go play a game of cards. Cribbage is a submarine favorite, has been ever since World War II. And then finally, you get to hit the rack and get some sleep. Try to get about 6 hours of sleep a day. Sometimes you don't get as much. Sometimes you might get a little bit more. You might get lucky. So it all kind of depends on what each day brings in terms of what needs to get done.
Sure. And what's coming to mind is when astronauts go into space, they do specific training to prevent for or the lack of gravity thereof. Um, for yeah, are there health implications in regards to being at sea for extended periods of time?
Well, again, it depends. There's no common like problem. Like being at sea for that long isn't going to necessarily be bad for you. It's important to maintain yourself in good physical shape. There are generally exercise facilities, limited exercise facilities on board the cramped confines of a submarine, but there is a ability to exercise that's encouraged. There's plenty of food. Try to eat good food. Try to eat the fruit and vegetables when you have them. And then just managing your own personal health. People run into health problems from time to time. There is a corpsman, fully qualified medical corpsman, not quite a doctor, but He's certified for independent duty, able to do minor surgery if necessary. I've actually seen a corpsman sew a sailor's fingertips back on after they were sheared off in a hydraulic press. That was pretty impressive. And it's thanks to that corpsman that that sailor has those fingertips today. So, but people experience some things like sometimes you'll get heartburn, sometimes you get indigestion. If you're tall like me, sometimes you might hit your head on something. Uh, Sometimes people slip and fall or happen to get injured just through going around day to day, and those things can be dealt with. If there anything comes up that you can't deal with on board the ship, if necessary, we can get people off. We can make arrangements for them to get medevaced off so they can get proper medical care, and will do if we realize that they're in a situation that's beyond our ability to handle on board the ship. But that doesn't happen very often.
How big is the ship?
So it depends. The Alabama, being an SSBN, is 560 feet long, about 44 feet wide, and weighs near 20,000 tons. I think the actual spec is a little bit more than 18,000 tons. The Key West, being a Los Angeles class fast attack submarine, was only about 360 feet long and 33 feet wide, so quite a bit smaller. But she also didn't have to carry 20 space going missiles around.
So I'm curious. Uh, we were discussing quite a bit of history before we sat down and
Mhm.
actually pressed record, which is quite fun. Throughout history, at least recent history, especially with the age of European exploration, it seems that whoever controls the sea, whether it's the Portuguese or the British or the Americans, tend to have a firm hand in world politics. Why is the Navy so important for America, and by extension, why are nuclear submarines so important for America?
The Navy's job is to ensure the use of the sea for us and for our allies and partners. Alfred Thayer Mahan wrote a very important treatise about this where he talked about the sea lines of communication, shipping routes, the ability to move goods and products and communication across the ocean. In his time, it was all done on ships. Mail had to be carried on ships. Today, it's done through underwater cables. Undersea cables connect the great land masses of the world. The internet is carried through them. They're extremely vital for international trade, commerce, communication, and so on. And a lot of our actual physical products are carried via ship today. You see these enormous cargo ships full of cars or iPhones or what have you. And there's vastly more of them now than there were in the 1950s, and definitely more than there were in, say, the 19th century. So there's an enormous amount of economic value in ensuring that we have the ability to use the ocean. There's also a national security piece in that we need to ensure the safety not only of our commerce, but also our citizens on the ocean, which means we need to be able to ensure that if anyone wanted to deny us the use of the sea, that they were not able to do so. Similarly, uh, the sea services, the Navy, the Coast Guard, and the Marine Corps can all support the land services, the Army and the Air Force in their operations. We saw this a lot when we were doing Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. When I was on board Enterprise, we were launching aircraft from the Arabian Gulf to be able to fly into Afghanistan and support ground troops there. Huge force multiplier, being able to project that power from the sea and support the land mission or the air mission, or even if necessary, the space mission. A number of years ago, the USS Lake Erie shot down a satellite that was in decaying orbit and was going to re-enter the atmosphere, and there was concern about where it was going to come. And they were able to use one of their missiles on board that ship to shoot the satellite down from its decaying orbit, make sure it was able to be destroyed before it hit anything.
And specifically, nuclear submarines.
So nuclear submarines are the apex predators of the ocean. They are able to go anywhere in the world undetected fairly quickly, accomplish their mission, and leave. And if necessary, they can stay on station for days, weeks, maybe even months at a time because they have a nuclear reactor on board. You don't have to stop for gas except for every 20, 30 years. That's a huge force multiplier. I can make my own air. I take seawater, I split hydrogen and oxygen. I use the oxygen to breathe. I've got ways of taking the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. I make all the electricity I need. I can do my air conditioning. The only thing I really can't replenish is food and the mental health of the crew, which is why you can't keep the crew at sea forever and you have to make sure they have food. But those are really the limiting factors for submarine operations. So I now have a platform which has a lot of sensor varieties. I can have sonar, I can have optical sensors, I can have ultramagnetic sensors. I have a communications platform that can do intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. It can escort a battle group. It can show the flag in various foreign ports. It can uh, track enemy movements. It can collect data on what's happening in certain parts of the world. It can detect smuggling. Excuse me. We've had counter narcotics operations that the Navy has supported, where a submarine can identify that somebody's trying to smuggle narcotics down in Southern Command, South America. We cannot interdict them. The Navy doesn't have the authority to do that. Have to use the Coast Guard for that. But we've done joint ops with the Coast Guard before, where we've found the smugglers and then told our Coast Guard partners, "Hey, this is what's going on. This is where they are. Go get them," and able to enable that force multiplier. So nuclear submarines are extremely important for that. And the fact that they have nuclear power means they can stay underwater 4 months at a time, make their own air, make their own water, make their own electricity, and go where they need to go.
That is fascinating.
Mhm.
So how deep do they typically go if they're gonna be submerged for that long?
Deep enough.
Okay.
I can't tell you exactly.
For sure. Classified.
Mhm.
Um, Follow up on that. With submarines, you mentioned, the mental health of the sailors. What happens if there's a potential disease outbreak? So that's one at the individual level. And what about the health of the organization at whole? How do you keep morale high? Is there ever issues in terms of disobedience? I'm not saying necessarily mutiny or anything, but just like a lack of. I mean, you're all at sea, and the enlisted outnumber the officers. I'm assuming so. I'm just curious how that works, how that chain of command works, and how order functions when you're just kind of in the middle of nowhere.
That's fair. And the enlisted do outnumber the officers. There's generally about 16 to 20 officers on board a ship, and then the other 140 sailors are enlisted. But like I started with the beginning of the conversation, the officers form a bond with their enlisted shipmates because they're eating together, they're working together, they're standing watch together. They get to know each other on a very personal level. I mean, if you spend 8 hours a day looking at the control panel of a nuclear reactor with 3 other people, you're gonna get to know them very well. You're gonna get to know their families, you're gonna get to know their kids, you're gonna get to know their likes, their dislikes, you're gonna get to know how to make them really upset really quickly, you're gonna get to know, how to make them laugh, and you're gonna care about them a lot. And that is the kind of camaraderie that comes out of being together on a submarine for that amount of time. And it's something you don't really get as much in the other communities in the Navy, I think, in the surface fleet or in the aviation community, because you're not forced to spend so much time together. You're not forced to get that closeness that comes through proximity and through consistently being together, doing the same thing day in and day out. So, cruiser submarines work together very well. Uh, the Navy is very proud of the fact that there are not mutinies on their ships. I don't think there's ever been a mutiny on their ship, certainly not successfully. And I don't think there's really much danger of that ever happening. Obviously, people can have problems. Illnesses will tend to spread fairly quickly on the ship. Everybody talks about the boat crud. You know, you get underway, somebody had a nascent cold. Now everybody's got it because everybody's breathing the same air. And it'll pass in a week or two. Everybody takes lots of stuff underway. Vitamin C, airborne is a favorite. Emergency is another favorite. And you just learn to manage it. It's one of the facts of life. If there was a serious problem that was actually preventing people from being able to do their jobs, then again, the corpsman's got some medicine on board he can use to help manage that. And if absolutely necessary, the ship could return to port. But I don't know of that ever having to actually happen. In terms of disciplinary issues, uh, when you have people, you're going to have problems. Not everybody has the best experience, and not everybody has the best outlook. Most disciplinary issues are transient things. Somebody made a mistake, or somebody had emotional outburst or whatever. And these are the kind of things that we can manage. They get managed by their chief or by their division officer. If necessary, there is a formal process of non judicial punishment, but that is usually reserved for particularly egregious offenses, which are very rare. Or recurring offenses where a sailor is not getting the message from his immediate leadership that he needs to change his behavior. So don't have to deal with that too often, but it is an occurrence, and it is definitely one of the less pleasant aspects of being in a leadership position.
It's good to have you back on land. I'm glad to see you
Good
because
to be here.
it's quite rare that our paths cross. What do you do now?
So now I am on shore duty, having completed my department head tour, which my wife is thrilled about. So back in Omaha and back at U.S. Strategic Command, where right now I am chief of submarine launch ballistic missile planning at Stratcom. So basically, that means that I lead a team of 7 people, 6 active duty Navy lieutenants, and 1 civilian government employee in doing all of the development of Strategic Command's operations plans for the submarine force.
So does geopolitics influence your work at all? Does it really matter what's happening with foreign powers or even at our national level, at the federal level? Like, where do you guys get influenced the most, or is the military kind of making their own decisions?
Well, the military is not making its own decisions, at least not in the vacuum. We work very closely with the administration, the executive branch. We work closely with the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs. We work with State Department. In fact, I had a liaison officer from State Department who came out and visited us in the air room. That's the office that I work in, where we do all the war planning. Recently, he wanted to get familiar with what we were doing and what we needed and how we could interact with the State Department more efficiently. We work with several civilian agencies in the government, the Department of Energy, DISA for computer and IT services. We work with DITRA, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, on nuclear force management and policy. And there's a lot of coordination that has to happen, especially if any policy change wants to come down. One of our primary jobs as members of a combatant command staff, which is what STRATCOM is. It's one of the 11 combatant commands that oversees operations of the military. Strategic Command specifically oversees the strategic forces. There are other geographic combatant commands that oversee general military operations in their geographic locations: North Command for North America, European Command for Europe, Indo-Pacific Command for the Indo-Pacific region, and so on. And then there's Transportation Command for the transportation side. There's Space Command, which is also a geographic combatant command, but their area of responsibility is everything outside 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface. So that's a particularly interesting one. I actually got to help stand that up in 2019. And we all talk to each other about issues that may cross our respective swim lanes and domains to make sure we're on the same page. And then we also have to work with the joint staff in matters of policy, with the executive branch, the White House, the State Department, and any other of the various stakeholders that may come into contact with. So as staffers, we have to do a lot of coordination, especially on policy documents. Any formal policy generally gets passed around to all the stakeholders at what's called the action officer level. That's like the basic staffer level. Once those inputs are taken together and collimated and a final product is worked out, that is then passed up to the O6 level. That's colonels or captains in the Army or the Navy, respectively, and their similar services, for their review and their input. And again, edits are made, and a finalized version is generated, and then it's passed around at the GOFO level: general officers and flag officers, people with stars on their collars. And then they get to review it. They may have a few changes. They get to coordinate. And then whoever is responsible for approving that document, whether it is a admiral, a general, or even the president, ends up signing it, and then it becomes official policy. So there's a lot of work that goes into developing policy before it is actually finalized.
It's good to hear.
Mm.
A lot of thought is being put into this. You've had a strong, let's say, family history of being tied to warriors and soldiers, correct?
Mhm.
I want to start first with the Scottish origin of your name.
Okay.
And so you're not a tailor.
I am a tailor,
Okay.
just not an English tailor.
There we go.
So obviously, Andrew, St. Andrew, patron saint of Scotland. But the tailors that I come from trace their lineage to an axe warrior called Black Taliad of the Axe, who fought in the Jacobite rebellions in the 16th century. Uh, on the losing side, unfortunately, during that war. But his name and his progeny was enough to create the surname that we know today. And the Scottish tailors are a sept of the Clan Cameron.
Okay. And then your father served in World War II?
No, my father served in the British Army after World War II, but his father, my grandfather, was in the British Army during World War II. And there's actually a picture of him outside because my dad was born during World War II. But he was in the British Army. I think his dad was in the British Army, and there's a long lineage in the Taylors going back to Black Talir of the Axe. On my mother's side, it's a little less concrete. My grandfather, her dad, was in the U.S. Army. during Vietnam. Uh, did not actually go to Vietnam, but that was a little bit of service he did there. Um, it's interesting to note, though, that he and I are the only two officers in my history. All my dad's family was enlisted. And so I am the first of my part of the tailors to go and get a commission, which was a big deal for my dad, I think.
Sure. So, you've done quite a bit. You've been across the world. You've learned quite a bit through service. I'm just curious, in your eyes, there are some of the obvious things that come with serving the military, such as holding yourself to a certain standard, physical requirements, leadership, management. What's something that was kind of perhaps unconventional or surprising that you feel like you learned from your time so far?
Well, there's a number of things that I was not expecting that I learned, like the fact that you stand 8 hours of watch a day and then you have to go and do admin and training. It's a lot more than what you might see just from watching Star Trek. To the degree of intelligence and drive and ability that exists in so many different people from so many walks of life. Um, Sailors are not a homogeneous group of people. They look like the United States of America. I've met sailors from the sticks in the South. I've met sailors from cities in the North. I've met sailors who went to the beach every day as kids. I've met sailors who went to the mountains every day as kids. I've met sailors who were tops of their class in grade school. I've met sailors who were bottoms of their class in grade school. And all of them bring their own unique experiences and backgrounds and perspectives to the table. And most of them, by and large, do extremely well. And you spend 80% of your time on 20% of the people who are having the problems. But we do a pretty good job, I think, of helping people reach their potential and push through their issues and succeed. It takes a village. And a ship, and especially a division on board a ship, really is that village, that tribe. And the best teams work together to make sure that everybody is okay. Everybody has what they need to be successful and is able to grow. And I think actually being able to see that sense of combined success, that sense of teamwork and family play out, and to be a part of that, albeit in a small way, has been enormously gratifying and is one of the things I'm most grateful for about my career. That makes up for a lot of sleepless nights, that makes up for a lot of administrative headaches, that makes up for a lot of angry superiors, that makes up for so many things that have been challenging. The just satisfaction of seeing people grow and do well and achieve the things that they aspire to, things that they may not even have thought that they could do, is enormously fulfilling.
I'm glad you mentioned that. It's touches on a theme we've been discussing recently. The very fact that the sailors look like and represent all of America. I mean, that's really great to hear. And one of the things that's a common thread between you and I is we're both big patriots. We love this country. I guess a closing question for you: how can America continue to be great, given that it seems that political division, polarization, a host of issues are plaguing civilians here, and some of them are true, and some of them might just be exacerbated by social media. But as someone who has essentially, dedicated his life and is prepared to lay down his life for the rest of us, I'm just curious. All of you are doing this service so that the rest of us can enjoy our time here and do the things that we do. What Any advice for Americans, or what should we be focused on to keep this country going? Because I forgot who said the quote. It might have been Lincoln, but the house, tears from within rather than from outside. So I'm just curious, from your perspective as military, what do you have advice for us Americans?
The basic advice is, the same advice I would give to Americans, sailors, Marines, you know, Japanese, Europeans, any person on the planet really, is go out and find a way for you to find fulfillment and make things a little bit better. Whether it's you go out and you get a job and you do your job really well, or you go out and you teach people, or you go out and start a business, or you go out and join the service, or you go out and pursue politics, or you go out and pursue education. Just go find some way to make the world a little bit better and achieve fulfillment and happiness for yourself. And then for Americans specifically, I know you talked about the political division, and it's just as there in the service as it is in the civilian world. Service is made up of human beings. It's made up of Americans. We feel the same stresses and the same pressures and the same schisms that the rest of the country feels. Now we have to set some of that aside. A lot of our personal motivations or feelings or prejudices aside in the name of the greater cause of service. You know, ship itself. Our loyalty is foremost to the nation and the Constitution. And then we have to worry about looking after our ships, and then we have to worry about looking after our shipmates, and we have to worry about looking after ourselves. So remembering that priority, I think, and remembering that, you know, whatever is going on politically, whatever challenges there may be, however you may feel about it, you may like things that are happening, you may not like the things that are happening. Remember that America isn't going anywhere, and America is not made up of a government. America is not made up of a political party. America is not made up of a bunch of people on the internet. America is made up of Americans. And people ask me like, "Oh, well, why do you think it's going to happen to the country with all this stuff happening and all this change and all this churn and a lot of division?" And I say, I think America will be fine. We'll have growing to do. It may be painful. We have grown before in our history. It has been painful before in our history. But America is Americans. And I have had the privilege of seeing a great many American men and women do incredible things. I have great faith in America because Americans have proven to me time and again that they can find ways to be successful, and they might not even believe it themselves.
Well, Lieutenant Commander Andrew Taylor, thank you very much for your service.
And thank you for your support.